So Dr. J. Goos received his BS and MS degrees from South Dakota State University and his PhD degree from Colorado State University. He has been a faculty member at NDSU since 1980. He has conducted research with iron-deficiency chlorosis of soybeans since 1996. All right.
Okay. So I'm going to talk today about iron-deficiency chlorosis. This is something I've worked on since 1997 or so. You know, I just want to say that there are 13 elements that plants get from the soil. And I have published papers on 7 of those 13 elements. And I can tell you there is nothing like iron-deficiency chlorosis in soybeans. And, you know, you need nitrogen, you apply nitrogen. You need phosphorus or potassium, you just apply it. You need sulfur, whatever. There is no nutrient deficiency like iron-deficiency chlorosis. The one common denominator, and I know there's people here that aren't from this area, the one common thing that has to happen for there to be IDC is there has to be calcium carbonate or lime in the topsoil. And around here in the Red River Valley of North Dakota and Minnesota and Manitoba, that's normally because of a high water table in the spring. And what do we mean by that? If you dig a hole deep enough, there's free water in the hole. Okay. And also elevated salinity makes it worse. And maybe not as appreciated, elevated nitrates can make IDC worse. Whenever I want to make IDC worse in the greenhouse, you just up the nitrate content of the soil and you'll make the IDC worse. So everything coming through okay so far on the presentation? Okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. So I just wanted to show you a catena or a simple soil sequence from the Red River Valley. Glacial Lake Agassiz, it's dead flat here. Elevation differences of 1 foot in a field are usually about all you get. There's more elevation difference in the tallest roller coaster at Valley Fair in the Twin Cities as there is between here and Winnipeg. So on the Red River. So we don't have much relief here. So here's a typical catena or soil sequence in the Red River Valley. Elevation differences of 1 foot can make a big difference. Where do we find lime in the topsoil in this field? Well, that's where you find and where you don't find lime in the topsoil in this field with less than 1 foot elevation difference. And this, what the picture in front of you is not an exaggeration because this is what we see all the time. You know, if you look in the foreground, here the soybeans are quite normal. You take a couple paces, the soybeans are dead or nearly dead or going to die. So high spatial variability with minuscule amounts of elevation difference. And this is a common sight in the Red River Valley in the spring. There are areas of the Red River Valley where you can't drive out of sight of this, fields like this later on in, say, June. Well, what's a typical soil like this look like? Well, if you look way down in the bottom, you have what's called a CG horizon. You notice the color is different down here. This is in a water table for several months every year. And there's usually a water table in this particular soil about 3 feet deep every spring, like Hans talked about in his presentation. And the water wicks up to the top and the wetting front, the capillary rise reaches the front every spring. And if you take a piece of that topsoil and put a drop of acid on it, it fizzes like crazy. So the common denominator with respect to soils and IDC is that lime in the topsoil. But then again, there are other seasonal factors which include big dump of rain, excess nitrate, salinity, and so on can also intensify it. So it's not only kind of a permanent problem, but it's also a seasonal problem. So in-season rainfall affects it, temperature affects it, and the severity differs from year to year. We have good chlorosis years and bad chlorosis years. I'm about to put out a press release because people are thinking, well, it's kind of dry, so maybe this is not going to be a bad chlorosis year. Trust me, we have had very dry springs where the chlorosis ended up being horrible. You know, when you have really, really long, prolonged drying periods, salts and nitrates move up, and that can make it worse. So I'm going to tell farmers just because it's a dry spring doesn't mean that chlorosis is not going to be a problem. Plant factors, there are huge variety related differences. And excuse me, my throat's just a little dry. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And there are many fertilizer factors. There are many iron fertilizers. Most of them do not work. And the few that work are very expensive. So for this presentation, I just want to kind of bring people who are kind of new to this problem. I just want to tell you, just cut through a lot of stuff and just tell you what the practical situation is. I want to tell you a couple things that are relatively new for 2021 and tell you some studies that are in progress. So the situation update with respect to iron deficiency chlorosis. Where are we with regards to variety selection, fertilizer options, and other cultural practices? I mean, like I said, I've worked on this problem since '97. We know so much more about IDC. We meaning soils, agronomists, geneticists. We know so much more about this than we knew 20 years ago. But if you ask any practical agronomist, they'll tell you this problem is as widespread and as bad as it ever was. And why is that? Well, I've got my unvarnished opinion, and my unvarnished opinion is IDC is as bad as it ever was because the varieties are as bad as they ever were. Now, of course, I'm not talking about University of Minnesota or NDSU varieties, of course, but that wild world of out there, there's a lot of bad varieties out there. I mean, some varieties are pretty good at obtaining iron from the soil. You know, I won't, a lot of people argue, well, is it resistance? Is it tolerance? Is it efficiency? I don't care what the terminology is. Some varieties are pretty good at obtaining iron from the soil and translocating it around. And some are really, really bad at it. So you can't tell me when you got soybeans like this right next to soybeans like this, you can't tell me that the genes don't exist because the genes are out there. And there have been many genomic studies done on this situation. Numerous papers, not only from NDSU, but from other workers, have identified genetic associations with regards to IDC resistance. My name is on like, I don't know, 3 or 4 of them at least, because I had this large collection of seed and a large collection of field chlorosis scores that the genomic people then used to find these associations. And, you know, this is one paper I have here by Phil McLean's group. They found 7 major regions responsible for chlorosis resistance. And, you know, look, I'm a soil scientist. I don't even know how to spell DNA, okay? But from reading this or trying to read it, you know, these genes all provide some resistance. There's not like one killer gene like Berlin was talking about for Phytophthora. These genes kind of add together, and some are related to uptake and some are related to transport and translocation. So the genes involved with IDC resistance, it's going to be more complicated than just putting a cis nematode gene or a Phytophthora gene. There's many genes involved. At least that's my understanding of it. But I'll tell you what the practical problem is for farmers. The information given to them by seed companies regarding IDC resistance is, in general, not very good. Now, the old timers here, and particularly ones from North Dakota and Minnesota, they would know what the Lake Wobegon effect is. Lake Wobegon, Minnesota is a mythical little town. And the saying of Lake Wobegon, Minnesota is, that's the town where all of the children are above average. And you know what, when it comes to seed companies and their chlorosis scores, all of the children are above average. Now, I did this maybe about 3 years ago. I took Ted Helms's IDC scores, and I took different companies that had lots of varieties entered, and I compared Ted Helms' field scores from, multiple locations. Well, what did the companies say about it? Well, this one company did really, really good. Boy, the one Ted said was the worst, they said was the worst. The one Ted said was the best, they said the best, and the ones that were in the middle were in the middle. Thumbs up for that company. But boy, that was sure the outlier. Here's another company. Their chlorosis scores go from 1 to 9. Did you notice that all of their scores are 7, 8, or 9? All of their children are what? Above average. And so, a farmer or an agronomist looking at the literature for any one of these varieties, let's take the worst one here. The farmer's gonna say, dang, that's 7 out of 9. That's gotta be pretty good. No, it's not. Here's another company. Their scores go from 1 to 10. Well, all of their varieties are what? 8 to 10. Here's the worst variety. Farmer's gonna look at the literature and say, well, that's an 8.5 out of 10. That's gotta be pretty good. No, it's not. But I tell you, friends, it gets worse. Here's one company. They got a 1 to 3 scale, and they don't tell you what's good. You don't know if 1's good. You don't know what 3's good. And I just went to their website the other day, and they still don't tell you if 1 is good or 3 is good. So here I have a chart, but their scores, I still don't know what they mean. So, okay, some companies do okay, but I tell you what, many, many companies give not reliable information to farmers about their chlorosis scores. Also, the commercial life of variety is only what, 3 or 4 years? And, and that's if you're lucky. We're in the same situation as we were in like 98, 99, when farmers were pushing Roundup Ready varieties on the market as fast as they could. A major company contacted me back then and said, can you test 10 varieties for me in the greenhouse? We're going to the field with them next year, and we don't have any chlorosis data. So that happens too. So companies are rushing to market with new genetic trait packages, and boy, some of those could sure use a year or 2 extra evaluation on IDC. What I'm trying to say is, people like me and Hans can say, plant an IDC resistant variety. It's more easily said than done. Let me give you an example. This is a farmer not far from the NDSU campus, and he planted a brand new variety. He wanted the latest trait package for weed control. And if you look down here, that seed company said this variety is good to very good for IDC resistance. Well, fortunately, he puts 3 pounds of soy green on the field, but look what happened here. I mean, apart from some escapes here, those beans essentially all died. I doubt if that control strip yielded 2 bushels per acre. Good or very good, was it? I don't think so. So what I'm saying is telling farmers to plant a resistant variety is more easily said than done. So what's the answer to the variety problem? Well, independent testing, of course. NDSU tests everything that goes into a yield trial, but like Hans told us, over half of the varieties that are sold never make it into an NDSU trial. So many of those farmers are in the dark. Many companies don't participate. I know a few larger, more affluent dealerships just have to do their own testing. It's still a great need. Education. I started a support group years ago in Colfax, North Dakota, called the Colfax Chlorosis Club, because, Colfax is ground zero for chlorosis in North Dakota. And we get together once a year, farmers and me and the agronomist and the county agent, and we would just share notes on what varieties worked and what ones didn't. And that sure helps too. Okay, control measure number 2, an effective iron fertilizer in furrow at planting. There's all sorts of iron fertilizers. Most of them don't work. Only the red chelates are good for soil application. Iron EDDHA is one of those red chelates. The most common brand name is Soygreen, but there are other brands on the market. EDDHSA is a similar compound with just a different group to make it more water soluble. These are the 2 ones that have been on the market recently. Unfortunately, it's messy to make these compounds. There are undesirable isomers and condensates. We developed a test. The Soygreen is a pretty good product. It's 80% ortho-ortho, but there's a lot of 50% ortho-ortho on the market, and you can just see the difference if you react it with soil for a week. The undesirable isomers just fall out. So put 3 pounds of Soygreen with the seed and we're good, right? No. Here's a study we did years back. We had a susceptible variety, an intermediate variety, and a more resistant variety. Well, yeah, and this is the chlorosis score, 1 to 5 at the 5 to 6 trifoliate stage. Yeah, 3 pounds of Soygreen will reduce the chlorosis and increase the yield of a susceptible variety, but can it turn a susceptible variety into a resistant variety? No, it's probably going to take 10 pounds per acre or more. Intermediate variety, reduce the chlorosis, increase the yield. Resistant variety, reduce the chlorosis and increase the yield. I mean, 3 pounds of Soygreen, costs the better part of what, $21 to $25 an acre. So that is a very significant cost. That's why resistance in the varieties are just so important economically. What about foliar sprays? Well, this is what happens when you put a soybean plant in a research spray booth and you spray it with a T-jet nozzle. We put Post-it notes on the end of the leaves. You can see where every droplet lands. It doesn't move. It doesn't move this way, and it doesn't move this way. So what's the state of the art? Variety selection is the most important control measure, but it's easier said than done. In-furrow fertilizers like Soygreen can help, but just can't turn a bad variety into a good variety. Other foliar sprays are little translocation, like our speaker said earlier, that companion crops, it's complicated. So what's new for 2021? A new chelate's being introduced, iron H-bed. Theoretically, it's better than Soygreen. Theoretically, it should hold iron 10,000 times more strongly than a chelate like Soygreen. My studies say it's about the same as a high quality EDDHA. To study this in the greenhouse, you have to do 2 greenhouse crops to crop down the iron. This is my soil stability test. This is iron HBED and Soygreen. Okay, so I would say that this new chelate, iron HBED, you can't say it's better than Soygreen, but I think it deserves a fair shake. I have developed greenhouse methodologies for screening varieties, and certainly we can screen varieties in the greenhouse now. I've done many cultivars for 3 large seed companies, and they have a lot of improvement to do. Maybe 1 in 10 commercial varieties that I've tested have tested acceptable for chlorosis resistance. And this was my pandemic greenhouse. This is where I spent the pandemic. And these are my office mates. And I was screening seed treatments and foliar sprays for chlorosis resistance. So what's happening beyond 2021? Humates are traditionally were thought of as snake oil products. They are extracts of a coal-like deposit. I'm finding that there might be some benefit of this is a control. This is soy green. This is soy green plus humates. There's going to be field trials on this in 2021. And beyond 2021, I am working on possible rescue treatments. This was a field trial I had near Glendon, Minnesota. This is a control. This is a spray with soy green. This is soy green plus something I'm studying. Again, rep 2, control, soy green plus an additive that I'm studying, and rep 3 and so on. I talk more about it, but the Research Foundation is looking at this to see if there's anything patentable here. So maybe 2022, we might have a rescue treatment. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. This research, as always, is supported by the Soybean Council and NSBAR.
Yeah, that was a really great presentation. I appreciate your enthusiasm for IDC. So
you notice that even my cat is yellow.
You can't escape it, huh?
I can't.
So do you really think that, like, has there been any significant gains in the past 20 years in ameliorating IDC?
You know, boy, you just talk to any practical agronomist and you just drive through the countryside. Of course, you know, part of it is, of course, just more acres too. You know, the farmers are, as it's been said earlier, they're even trying to grow soybeans around Dickinson. They're trying to push the acres out as far as possible. But yeah, boy, there's still just no end to the chlorosis in these chlorosis prone areas. And I think it's the continual churning of the varieties of these commercial varieties that is an issue.
Yeah. So you were talking about, it's funny because that paper you were talking about by you and Phil McLean, I just happen to have, it's kind of like my new Bible now that I'm in North Dakota.
It drips with the sweat of me and my technician.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but there are some really, as you can see, I have heavily marked this. So for the geneticists that are here, Jay and Phil McLean did some work, found 7 genes for conferring tolerance, but the allelic combinations of those 7 genes is very specific. And I even went through one by one and was like, do I need this one gene? Do I need this one gene? Do I need this one gene? And the answer was yes. There is no cutting out, because I was trying to get down to like 3 markers and it's not possible. So IDC, like I would assume any other physiological trait, is extremely nuanced within the plant to control.
Well, you know, they always ask if there's a yield drag with increased chlorosis resistance, but I always remind the farmers, yeah, but if the beans turn yellow, that's yield drag too.
That's what that would also be my answer. Be like, you would get yield drag if your plants were chlorotic as well. So does anybody in the audience have any questions? We have time for 1 or 2, or any of the panelists as well. Because if not, I'll just continue shooting the breeze about IDC with Jay. I can do that for a long time. Yeah, so we are going to start implementing marker-assisted selection for IDC and the soybean program, which is not easy, but I think you're right that the genetic resources for IDC resistance are not readily available, especially as you showed that the testing that's done by private industries is not done correctly. Do you think that's what it is, that it's not done correctly, or that it's biased?
Say that again.
The IDC scoring that's done by private companies is incorrect.
You know, I know some companies take it much more seriously than others. And you have to understand too, though, that and you know this better than I do, there are a few companies that produce a lot of varieties, but then there are companies that buy these varieties and then sell them.
Right.
You know? And so a lot of seed is sold by a lot of different people. And I remember, this is a long time ago, I was working with a company. If I said it, you'd know what it was. I asked the breeder, I said, well, how do you screen for chlorosis resistance? And he said, well, I plant hills. And I said, well, how many seeds do you plant per hill? And he said, 9. And I said, what do you thin it to? And he said, thin? I tell you what, if you plant 9 seeds per hill, those soybeans are going to be near normal. I wrote a paper on hill plots, and you have to thin it to 3 plants per hill for it to mimic a 30-inch row. So, you know, so they were, from the very get-go, the way they were planting their seed in hills was biasing their results to a more favorable answer. So I don't know how the big companies do it.
That's why NDC pays or sponsors well, it's not really research, but sponsors the testing that we do here, where, and for people in the audience who don't know, private companies and also the NDSU breeding program, we grow those commercial varieties in our own IDC testing in the hills, just as Jay described, and then do scoring, which is part of a annual manual that comes out published by Hans Kandel. And many farmers have said that that's extremely useful information for knowing what's truthful about the IDC scores.
Yeah, so Carrie, what Jay already was talking about, that, you know, unfortunately we're missing entries from the bigger companies. So we're missing about, you know, if you look at the acres, 50% of the acres are planted by other varieties. So it will be very nice if we can get some of the commercial ones to include too. Right, Jay? That is kind of what has happened.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I know 1 or 2 major dealerships that they just had to go to testing their own varieties, you know, just because they couldn't get, they just weren't trusting of all of the information they were getting from the wholesale seed reps that were pushing the varieties to them.
Interesting. Maybe we can start knocking on some doors and saying, hey, you should enter your lines into our private IDC testing. I would think it'd be a good sales tactic to reach more North Dakota farmers, or, you know, just let NDSU breeding program lead the way with that. I'm also okay with that.
Is Jay's laboratory going to open in a few years? A private laboratory?
Boy, I don't know. You want to go together with me on that, Berlin? Supplement our meager retirement income.
I guess we'd have to move into a trailer.
All right, fantastic. Jay, thank you so much. It's been fantastic.